I knew my relationship was over the moment I picked up the last flower from the soil I had planted with my own hands, and saw him watching from the doorway, smirking as if my years of work meant nothing. He thought kicking me out of his house would break me. He had no idea the tiny seeds I left behind would destroy everything he cared about. He had no idea the entire neighborhood would one day smell like a giant litter box, and everyone would know it was his fault. If you love stories where karma blooms louder than words, make sure you subscribe to the Betrayal Diaries. Grab a drink, settle in, and let me tell you how a handful of seeds turned into the revenge I never planned, but definitely deserved. I never thought a garden would be the thing that saved me. Not in a poetic way. Not in the sense of nature heals all wounds. No, I mean literally. The garden I built, every flower, every bed, every corner I tended with my own hands, ended up becoming the quiet weapon I never meant to create, but that life delivered into my lap anyway. My name is Brooke, and 8 years ago, I left a relationship that had rotted long before I found the courage to walk away. We had lived together for nearly 3 years. A house he owned, a space I tried desperately to turn into a home. It was my way of coping with the slow unraveling of us. The long nights of silence. The cold stares. The way he'd brush past me without touching me, without seeing me. But the part one never talk about, the part even my closest friends didn't fully understand, is how subtly he shifted from emotionally distant, to unpredictable, to frightening. The first time he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks, he apologized with tears in his eyes. The second time, he blamed stress. The third time, I realized apologies meant nothing if the behavior didn't change. And by the fourth time, I stopped believing he was capable of loving me at all. It took everything inside me to leave finally. Not because I was still attached to him, but because walking away meant facing the truth. I had spent years shrinking myself into someone he didn't even respect. When I told him I was moving out, he barely looked up from his phone. "Fine," he said. "Just don't take anything that belongs to me." I almost laughed. Anything that belonged to him? The only thing he maintained in that entire house was the Wi-Fi password. But I wasn't there to fight. I had one request. Just one. "I'm taking the garden," I said. "All the flowers. All the plants. Everything I planted." He shrugged. "Take whatever." "I don't care." Those words would come back to haunt him in more ways than he could ever imagine. I had poured hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars into those beds, rare lilies, heirloom roses, hydrangeas I'd nurtured from cuttings. My hands had been in that soil through every season, through every argument, through every night I cried myself to sleep. If anything in that house belonged to me, it was the garden. So I dug up every flower, working quietly while he pretended not to watch from the window. It took 2 days to get everything safely potted. 2 days of kneeling in dirt, sweating through my shirt, ignoring the tight pain in my chest that came from being near a man I could no longer trust. The day I went to buy the large pots, I wandered into the seeds section of the garden center. I don't know why, maybe habit, maybe comfort, maybe distraction. That's when I saw it. A packet labeled catnip. I had heard it was hard to grow. Unpredictable. Almost finicky. I picked it up, rolled it between my fingers, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I had a plan, but because I suddenly imagined one small, harmless thing. A few plants are popping up. A few neighborhood cats are rolling around in his flower beds. Maybe a mild inconvenience for a man who had made my life feel like walking on broken glass for years. A petty, tiny thought. I bought the seeds. Back home, after digging up the last of my flowers, I stood in the empty beds, bare soil staring back at me, the space looking as lifeless as I had felt in that relationship. I crouched down and tipped the first packet into my palm. The seeds were tiny, innocent, weightless. I sprinkled them. Not carefully, not thoughtfully, just scattered. A quiet goodbye, a whisper into the earth. I didn't expect anything to happen. I didn't even think about it again. I had survival on my mind, packing my things, finding a new place, rebuilding from scratch. Leaving an environment that had slowly crushed me was enough to occupy every waking moment. And eventually, life moved on. I moved on. Years passed. New job. New apartment. New friends. A new version of myself, one that didn't flinch when someone raised their voice. One that didn't apologize for existing. One that didn't shrink. I never once thought about those seeds. Not until yesterday. And that's where everything began again. But not the way you'd expect. No, it began with a new client. A drive through a familiar neighborhood. And a sight that nearly made me slam on the brakes. Because there, in front of his house, the house I once called home, stood a for sale sign. And scattered across the entire yard. 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 cats. Rolling. Sleeping. Frolicking like drunken acrobats. And the flower beds? A wild, overgrown jungle of green. Catnip. Everywhere. I didn't get out of the car at first. I just sat there, fingers curled around the steering wheel, staring through the windshield like I had stepped into some strange alternate universe. When I planted those seeds 8 years ago, I imagined, what? A few scraggly little plants? Maybe a couple of confused neighborhood cats lounging by the steps? But this looked like a botanical uprising. The once perfect suburban yard, his pride, his ego, his temple, had been swallowed whole. Catnip bushes towered knee-high, spilling over the walkway, bursting through the fence slats, creeping up the side of the house like green flames licking at the paint. And the cats. Goodness. It wasn't just 6. There were more now, dozens, it seemed, lounging on the porch rails, sleeping on the hood of a silver sedan, rolling on their backs in utter bliss among the thick, fragrant clusters of leaves. One fat, orange tabby stared at me like I was trespassing on their property. Another hissed at a newcomer trying to claim the best sunspot. I slowly opened the door and stepped out, and the smell hit me like a wall. Not the fresh, minty scent you might imagine. No, this was something else entirely. A strange mix of pungent mint, sun-baked weeds, and the unmistakable, nose-wrinkling aroma of, well, cats who very clearly considered this place their personal kingdom. So this was what my new client meant when she said the whole end of the street smelled like a litter box. Wow, I whispered, covering my nose. It was like nature itself had delivered poetic justice with far more enthusiasm than I had ever expected or intended. As I walked closer, something even stranger happened. A curtain in the front window twitched, then twitched again. And suddenly, there he was. My ex-Mark. I hadn't seen him in almost a decade, but I would have recognized that expression anywhere, a mix of disbelief, irritation, and the self-pitying disgust of a man who had always believed the world was conspiring against him. His hair was thinner, his shoulders hunched, and he wore that same old gray t-shirt with the stretched-out collar, the one I used to beg him to donate. He stepped onto the porch, broom in hand. Not to sweep. No, to shoo away cats. He waved the broom like a man trying to fight off a biblical plague. Get. Go on. Scram. A black and white cat stared at him with deep, unimpressed boredom, then rolled lazily onto its other side. Mark groaned in frustration, muttering something I couldn't hear from where I stood. He still hadn't noticed me. I should have walked away. I had no reason to approach him, no desire to reopen wounds I'd long since stitched shut. But something rooted me to the sidewalk. Not spite. Not triumph. Just closure. A final confirmation that life had moved forward in a direction I never could have imagined when I stood in this yard 8 years earlier, scared, bruised, and trying to leave quietly. I stepped forward. He finally looked up and froze. His eyes widened. His grip tightened around the broom handle. For a second, he looked almost afraid. Brooke. I nodded gently. Hey, Mark. The cats continued weaving between his legs, determined to reclaim the territory he so clearly thought he still controlled. He cleared his throat. What are you doing here? I had a new client down the street. Just happened to drive by. His gaze flicked toward the yard. Embarrassment flashed in his eyes, thick and dark. Oh, he said flatly. So you saw all this. I nodded again, trying to keep my face neutral. His cheeks reddened. He swatted at another cat, who dodged effortlessly and trotted right back into the greenery. Ever since he stopped himself. Ever since you what? Left? Escaped? Survived you? He started again. Ever since you took your plants out, this just happened. I blinked slowly. Your plants. He scratched his neck awkwardly. The flower beds. The ones you put in. I tilted my head. I told you I was taking the flowers, Mark. You agreed. He looked away, almost sulking. Yeah, well, I didn't expect. He gestured helplessly to the yard. This. A few cats meowed loudly at the dramatic sweep of his arm. I exhaled gently. I honestly didn't expect this either. He frowned, confused. What? I didn't know catnip would spread like wildfire. I didn't know it could take over a whole yard. I didn't know it would survive your upkeep. He glared. I corrected myself. Or lack of upkeep. He groaned. I've spent thousands, seriously, thousands, trying to get rid of it. Yard crews, weed killers, soil replacement, everything. It just grows back. I watched him for a moment. This man, who once screamed at me for dyeing a houseplant the wrong shade of green, was now being slowly driven mad by the most enthusiastic crop of catnip this town had ever seen. I even sold the house, he muttered, defeated. Or tried to. Tried to. I repeated softly. No one wants it, he said. Not with this problem. A ginger cat rubbed against his leg. He flinched like the cat was radioactive. I pressed my lips together, fighting a smile. Sounds stressful. Stressful? He stared at me, incredulous. Brooke, I'm basically running a cat sanctuary against my will. Another cat climbed onto the porch rail and pawed at his sleeve. He shook his arm gently. Go on. Get off me. The cat blinked, then climbed onto his shoulder and settled there proudly, like a king claiming his throne. I lost it. I laughed. Hard. Harder than I had in years. Mark sputtered. It's not funny. Oh, Mark, I said, wiping my eyes. It's a little funny. He glared, exasperated. The cat on his shoulder let out a triumphant MRR. I sighed. I didn't come here to gloat. Truly. I just wanted to say, I'm glad things worked out the way they did. His face contorted. For you, he said. Yes, I replied calmly. For me. And with that, I turned and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard him mutter, "Stupid cats," followed by an indignant meow. I got into my car, closed the door, and let the engine hum softly beneath me. As I pulled away, more cats appeared from the bushes, stretching, prancing, prowling through their leafy paradise. And all I could think was, sometimes the universe takes your tiny spark of revenge and turns it into a wildfire you never expected. A fierce, green, wildly overgrown symbol that some people reap exactly what they sow, and some gardens? Well, some gardens choose their own justice. I didn't move for a moment, just stood there at the end of the street, staring at the house where I'd once cried into my hands, once begged for kindness, once wondered how I'd become so small. Now it looked like Mother Nature herself had decided to rise and take my side. 6 cats lounged across the yard like they were sunbathing at a private resort. One lay belly up on the walkway. Another rubbed itself against the for sale sign so aggressively that it looked personal. The others lounged in clusters, blinking lazily as if the place belonged to them now. Because it did. And the smell. Even with my car windows up, even from where I stopped on the curb, I could catch it when the breeze turned, a strange, dusty sweetness mixed with something sharp and unmistakable. Catnip and cat territory. The house had become a feline nightlife hotspot. I took a slow breath, gripped the steering wheel, and let out a laugh I hadn't expected, a laugh from the deepest part of me, the part that survived him. Because I remembered everything. His voice the night I told him I was leaving. Fine. Run. Nobody else will want you. I gave you a home. His voice when I packed my bags. You're nothing without me. His voice when I told him I was taking the flowers I'd planted. They're mine. This is my house. The bruises. The shouting. The nights I had hidden in the bathroom, praying he'd fall asleep quickly. The mornings I'd put makeup over the marks so no one would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. And then, the small, impulsive act. A few handfuls of seeds sprinkled into freshly turned soil. A moment of quiet rage wrapped in garden gloves. I'd almost forgotten it. But nature didn't. Nature remembered. As I watched, a seventh cat padded lazily out from under the porch, sat down in the middle of the walkway, and yawned like it paid the mortgage. My phone buzzed in my hand, my new client checking in, but I didn't answer right away. I couldn't pull myself from the sight of that house. His house. Not mine. Never mine. And thank goodness for that. The irony of it all? He always hated cats. Claimed they were annoying. Couldn't stand the sound of their meowing. Would mutter under his breath about the neighbor's tabby walking across the fence. And now? He had an entire neighborhood's worth of them clamoring to get high in his yard. A soft wind rustled through the catnip jungle, sending waves through the green like a ripple of laughter. I loosened my grip on the steering wheel and exhaled. Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it grows quietly in the soil. Sometimes it takes root when you're too hurt to see straight. Sometimes it spreads and spreads until one day, years later, you round a corner and find it blooming most unexpectedly. Nature doesn't forget. And neither do people who've been broken and rebuilt. I put my car into drive, but before pulling away, I whispered to myself, "Well, Brooke, looks like the universe really did plant something for you." Then I drove off, leaving the house and the past behind me. Because some endings write themselves. And some grow wild. That thought lingered in my mind as I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the house that used to feel like a cage. I used to believe healing had to look tidy, clean lines, clean breaks, clean endings. But healing, like gardens, doesn't always follow straight rows or neat borders. Sometimes it spreads in unexpected directions. Sometimes it thrives in places you thought were ruined. And sometimes it grows right over the man who tried to break you. I took a slow step toward the yard, listening to the crunch of gravel under my shoes. The cats lounging in the flower beds barely acknowledged me. One flicked its tail, another yawned lazily, a third rolled onto its back like it owned the place. For a moment, I had to laugh. I'd planted those catnip seeds out of spite, thinking it would just be a little pinch, a little nuisance, something petty to scratch the surface of my anger. I never imagined this. A full-blown, unstoppable, leafy empire. The irony was poetic. This man tried to control me, isolate me, make me small. And I left behind something he could never control. Something that slipped through his grip. Something he couldn't yell at or intimidate. Something that grew stronger every time he tried to destroy it. It was almost symbolic, really. Life finds a way even after someone tries to stomp it out. As I stood there, the wind swept through the yard, brushing the catnip leaves into a soft ripple. The air smelled sharp and herbal, and beneath it, yes, a hint of that unmistakable litter box aroma the neighbors had warned me about. Poetic justice has many scents. Apparently, this one just happened to be cat-themed. And honestly, I wasn't mad about it. I took one last look at the house, not bitterly, not angrily, but with a strange softness I didn't expect. I wasn't the woman who had walked away from it years ago. I'd outgrown this place long before the catnip ever did. A voice broke my thoughts. "Excuse me," a man called out from across the sidewalk. I turned to see a neighbor watching me, maybe in his 60s, wearing gardening gloves and holding a small rake. "You looking to buy that place?" he asked. I almost choked on a laugh. "No, definitely not." He nodded toward the yard. "Shame about the catnip. Heard the owner tried everything. Digging, burning, spraying. Nothing works. Comes back twice as strong." "Yeah," I murmured, "it tends to do that." He blinked. "You say that like you've seen it before." I smiled. "Just a little. You could say that." He chuckled. "Well, whoever planted it sure left their mark." My smile grew. "Yeah," I said softly. "They did." He waved goodbye and walked off, leaving me alone with the wind, the cats, and the garden I never meant to grow. I took one last slow inhale, letting the scent of the catnip, that stubborn, unstoppable, wildly thriving catnip, settle into my chest. Not regret. Not guilt. Just acceptance. The past had a funny way of blooming long after you left. But me? I wasn't rooted here anymore. I turned away from the house, stepped back onto the sidewalk, and walked toward my car without looking back. Some gardens grow wild. And some women? We learn to grow that way too. I stepped back from the window of my new little rental home, arms crossed loosely over my chest, watching the morning sun spill across my own fresh garden beds. My new flowers, my reborn sanctuary, were pushing through the soil in neat rows, slowly building the life I was rebuilding right alongside them. But my thoughts drifted, inevitably, back to him, and the yard I had left behind. The place where everything had fallen apart. The place where a small act of spite had grown into something much bigger than even I could have imagined. Back then, I wasn't thinking about revenge. Not really. I was thinking about escape. When you leave someone who hurts you, truly hurts you, you don't walk out with a plan. You don't walk out with confidence or clarity. You walk out with shaking hands and a heartbeat that doesn't slow for days. You walk out with whispered prayers that this time, this step, this break, is the one that keeps you alive. So when I took my flowers with me, those expensive blooms I had nurtured through frost and heat and broken promises, it wasn't pettiness. It was survival. It was taking the last beautiful thing I still owned. And the catnip? That was just convenience. A whim. A moment of impulsive rebellion in the middle of a garden center aisle. When I sprinkled those seeds into the empty beds around his house, I didn't think I was planting anything meaningful. I didn't know catnip, once it decided to take root, would become a force of nature. I didn't know it would thrive with the kind of ferocity I wished I had possessed back then. I didn't know it would take over. But maybe, deep down, some part of me knew I needed something to outgrow him. Something to survive him. Something to show me that life can creep into cracks you thought were permanent scars. For years, I didn't think about the seeds. Not once. Until yesterday. Until I drove past that house, the house that once belonged to both of us, but now belonged entirely to the past, and saw the for sale sign leaning hopelessly in the yard. And the cats. Dozens of them. Sleeping in the bushes. Rolling in the grass. Parading along the walkway like they owned the place. I had driven by slowly, window cracked just an inch. And the smell hit me. Sharp. Unmistakable. Like a warning label carried on the breeze. I didn't laugh. Not at first. I just stared, stunned, at the jungle I created by accident. At the way the catnip had risen against the walls, around the fence, across the lawn, claiming every inch like it had been waiting for the chance to take over. Then I smiled. Not because of revenge. Not because he deserved it, though he did. Not because his life was inconvenienced. I smiled because something small, something I barely thought about, had grown powerful enough to change the whole landscape. And maybe that meant I could too. Later that day, when my client told me the whole story, how he'd tried digging it out, burning it out, smothering it under plastic, poisoning it, replanting with clean soil only for it to return fiercer each time, I didn't gloat. I just felt strange. A mix of disbelief, poetic justice, and something like healing. Because the truth is, the catnip didn't ruin anything. It just revealed what was already broken. He let it spread because he never cared for anything or anyone well enough to stop it. He let it overgrow because everything in his life was something he expected someone else to maintain for him. And he let his property fall apart the same way he let our relationship collapse, through neglect, through arrogance, through the assumption that I would always be the one to clean up the mess. But this time, I wasn't there. And nature itself stepped in. Now his yard was a feral kingdom of green, humming with stray cats and the consequences of his own indifference. People avoided that end of the street. The neighbors complained every summer. The smell, the noise, the chaos. And somewhere in between all those stories, I realized something. Sometimes karma isn't lightning. Sometimes it isn't fire. Sometimes it isn't loud or dramatic or cinematic. Sometimes it's seeds. Tiny, overlooked, forgotten. Until one day, they take over everything you built on selfishness. And the only thing left standing is what you never expected to grow. I stepped out onto my porch, breathing in the soft scent of my new garden, the one blooming exactly the way I tended it. My choices, my care, my hands, my life. I closed my eyes and let the sun touch my face. Some gardens grow wild, I whispered again under my breath. And some women. We grow exactly the way we need to. I stood there in the quiet, watching the breeze stir through the leaves, listening to the soft rustle of something alive, something free moving through the garden that used to be mine. Some gardens grow wild, I whispered again, letting the truth of it settle deep in my chest. And some women. We grow exactly the way we need to. I hadn't planned revenge. I hadn't plotted or schemed or set out to ruin anything. All I had done was take what belonged to me, walk away from a man who hurt me, and leave behind a handful of tiny, stubborn seeds. Seeds that refuse to die. Seeds that refuse to be controlled. Seeds that refuse to behave. Just like me. The irony wasn't lost on me, not then, not now. Catnip doesn't ask permission. It doesn't apologize for surviving. It doesn't shrink to make room for someone who tries to stomp it out. It grows. It spreads. It takes over. And maybe, in a strange way, that's exactly what I needed. Not revenge. But a reminder. That the things meant to crush you rarely succeed. That you can walk away from a person who tried to own your life. And still bloom in ways they never imagined. My ex's house went up for sale. His yard smelled like a dozen sunbathing cats. His precious landscaping was a chaos he couldn't tame. And me? I drove home to my new place, my peaceful place, with soil under my nails, sunlight on my shoulders, and a freedom no one would ever take from me again. Revenge wasn't the catnip. Revenge was the quiet, steady truth that I survived him. And flourished. Some gardens grow wild. And some women grow stronger. If you enjoyed this story from the Betrayal Diaries, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more true, raw, and shockingly satisfying tales of karma and comeback. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unexpected revenge you've ever witnessed?